All right, hello, and welcome to episode 19 of Great Quarter Guys, where finance and freight meet and everything in between. And today we're doing a little bit of the in-between. We are talking about the legal aspect of trucking. Nuclear verdicts has been a major topic along the industry for the last 10 or 15 years. I have one of the most prominent trucking defense lawyers in the country here with me, Joe Pappalardo. How are we today?
Doing great, thanks, Andrew.
All right, so Joe's been trying trucking cases for how long now?
Oh, it's coming up on 40 years.
40 years, and he says he's tried over 150 cases. And I'll give you a little moment to give us a little background on your work every day.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad I could be in the studio today because I was in Chattanooga. As I said, I've been practicing law for about 40 years. The practice has changed immensely. For about the last 20 years, I've really concentrated on defending trucking companies and truck drivers in civil, that is, money cases. And I'm fortunate to represent some of the greatest and largest and best trucking companies in the country, and also insurance companies for trucking companies.
Right. So let's just jump right into it. We used you as a major resource in our paper that we wrote on nuclear verdicts back in November. And we'll just start at the very top. You know, we define nuclear verdicts in two ways. We defined it in a monetary way, which is kind of the basic way to do things. Anything over $10 million, that wasn't how you defined it. And then other people define it kind of as a multiple of the damages done. How do you define a nuclear verdict?
Well, I kind of define it as a verdict that will shock the conscience of the average person. And that can be anything. But these verdicts that we talk about, and I follow them all, even though I practice law in Ohio. I go all over the country, and my firm, Gallagher Sharp, give a little plug there, has been really great supporting me and our trucking group. But anyways, you hear about verdicts that $10 million verdicts or $20 million. I know people are going to be aggravated at me, but they're really not that unusual nowadays. Those are pretty commonplace.
Right. You mentioned earlier we were gonna talk about the latest one here that happened to RCX in Arkansas. They had a $23 million nuclear verdict that kind of sunk them. They had to shut their doors. But you said a minute ago that wasn't even that's pretty commonplace. That $23 million.
Yeah, those happen quite often, and I noticed that verdict was actually reduced by a court of appeals down to $7.5 million, and that cases are routinely tried and settled for that kind of money. But and I'm not trying to be flippant about that. I mean, people, the average regular person, not lawyers, I call them regular people, are saying, "What are you, crazy? It's more than $1 million." But those days have come and gone. We're talking about verdicts in the $100-200 million range. But anything, yeah, I mean, you talk about 50 million, 100 million, then we're really talking. It's like the guy said $1 billion here and $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. And I can see where this poor company got put out of business on a verdict that was $23 million and reduced to $7.5.
Yeah, I'll give you guys some facts about this case. So this is RCX in Arkansas. This is a third-generation trucking company, and they had to shut down 2 weeks ago. They had been fighting, again, this $23 million verdict from a 2015 accident, and like Joe just said, that verdict actually was dropped down to $7.5 million from a court of appeals in 2019, but the company, that's still too much money for the company to survive, so they've had to shut their doors. I think they've had about 30 drivers that have had to find new jobs, and here's some details of the actual wreck itself. So one of the RCX trucks broke down en route with a truckload of L'Oreal products. The load had been brokered by Sunset. Upon breaking down, RCX then contracted another carrier to finish the trip. And while that carrier was driving, they hydroplaned, ended up running off the side of the road, running into the other lane, and actually killed the driver and seriously injured another person. That's kind of the facts of it. What do you think about that wreck in particular, Joe?
Well, it's tragic, and anytime there's a tragedy like that, people are going to want to sympathize with the injured party. And even though I'm a big booster of trucks and trucking companies and drivers, we can talk about it a little later. But people are scared of trucking companies and trucks because they're huge and they're big, right, and all that. So it looks to me like that was obviously a liability case. In other words, the hydroplaning truck driver was at fault if he went over the center line, or she. And but it appears to me also that the trucking company that sent the load over to the second motor carrier, RCX, that sent it over, retain some aspect of control over the trip, the load, and jurors are looking for whoever's controlling the trucking company or the load or anything like that. They're always looking. You've heard the term deep pockets, and plaintiffs' lawyers, the people who sue us, are expert at trying to get more than one, as many as they can, people responsible for an accident. So it looks to me like that was their focus here.
What would you say that that RCX retained control over about time over the load? What would a situation look like where they're not in control? Like if they were able to get rid of liability there, what would that look like?
Well, what you're looking for is not controlling the time, means, and manner. Those are they're legal terms, but they make sense, don't they? Where you're telling the truck driver where to be when, how to do it, what route to take, making them check in with you, all of those types of things where the driver essentially becomes the employee or the driver of the company that's trying to avoid liability.
I see. Okay. So you're obviously a defense attorney for trucking companies. Tell us a little bit about the differences between. Actually, let's just start with the defense strategy. If you're if a trucking company, one of your clients gets into a wreck, what is the first thing they do? Do they call you as soon as the wreck happens, or after a suit has been filed, or what's
yeah.
The deal?
Well, I'm getting too old to do it, but I've done well over 100 what we call rapid or catastrophic, or some people call it CAT responses. And yes, we get called literally sometimes within minutes, but at least hours of a serious wreck. And we're out there right away sort of controlling and making sure that the investigation goes the way you want, interviewing the driver, making sure they're okay, and getting all the facts, the roadway, the equipment, looking for videos, looking for witnesses, all of that. So yes, my team and I do these rapid responses on a regular basis. Our firm did over 40 of them last year, and it's best if you're on the trucking side to have a lawyer, whether it's me or someone else, get retained immediately. And a lot of the better insurance companies do that, and the better trucking companies, the larger ones, will call us immediately, anytime, day or night. My trunk is filled with gear to go out to a roadway or a scene, and so all of us do that. Yeah.
So Cassandra Gaines, a big friend of FreightWaves, she has told us that one of the first things she does when she gets one of these calls is she tries to get the driver's phone. She says his phone can be one of the most important things about learning about the wreck. Do you agree with that? Do you often go after the phone?
Yeah, and the question is which phone. Unfortunately, the drivers can have more than one phone, and you have to always ask that question. It can be uncomfortable. But yes, if there's any hint, well, either way, you want to make sure you know whether the driver was on the phone. That's one of our hot button issues. Texting, talking. Of course, texting's completely prohibited. You can never do that. No emails, no text, no checking the internet. But even speaking on the phone, it has to be hands-free. And you want to know right away whether there's any possibility that the driver was on the phone, because jurors hate that. That's one of our hot button issues.
Right, is that the Dirty Five?
Yeah.
You want to run through those for a little bit?
Sure, I can do that. We kind of coined the phrase Dirty Five, and what we were trying to do is when we educate or speak or whatever, we were trying to get people to understand what the really hot button issues that when in our cases and our focus groups and our mock juries, what jurors hate. And the first one is fatigue. Any hint of hours of service violations, log violations, tired trucker, people are terrified of that. And with the new ELD mandate,
right,
where the electronic logs are now ubiquitous, they're everything. We should have a lot less of that, but jurors are terrified of fatigue and tired truckers. The second one is distracted driving, cell phones,
right,
looking at your phone, looking at the internet. If there's any hint of that, it's really bad. The third one is alcohol and controlled substances, drug and alcohol. As you know, under most circumstances, or many circumstances, drivers have to be tested after the accident if there's a fatality or if there's a citation. And of course, then there's random testing under other parts of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. If there's any hint of alcohol or controlled substance usage, that terrifies jurors. And then number 4 is maintenance issues. If there's something wrong with the truck, brakes, stability, even headlights or anything like that. You know that in the regulations with pre-trip and post-trip inspections, there's a whole list of things that they have to look at. That's a good place to start as to what jurors are afraid of, if there's any maintenance issues. And then the final one is training, hiring and training of drivers. That's overlooked a lot, and plaintiffs' lawyers are expert, and their experts are really keen on showing jurors that they think these people have not been trained, they're on autopilot, set them and forget them, and once they're hired, they don't get any training, they don't get recurrent training, no Smith system, no Keller training, that kind of stuff. And I understand that there's money involved, it's an economic thing, but training and recurrent training and proficiency of drivers is number 5 on our Dirty Five.
So, Joe, you do a lot of training with other lawyers around the country. You do, multiple national speaking events in a given year. Why is it, we talked to you before when we wrote the paper that plaintiff lawyers are much more well organized, that they do a better job sharing their information between the lawyers. Why is it that plaintiffs share their information better than defendant lawyers?
Well, I've never been able to really answer that question. It doesn't make sense to me. Especially if I'm giving information to somebody in California, I'm in Ohio, I'm happy to share. I speak, and a lot of us do. A lot of the trucking lawyers do that. I'll tell anyone any of my secrets. I share briefs and things like that. But a lot of people are they hold things to themselves for some weird, competitive reason.
They think they're going to lose clients or something?
Yeah, and I am not interested in somebody's client in California, but plaintiffs' lawyers think that every time a plaintiff gets a gigantic verdict, it helps the entire plaintiff industry.
Right.
They think that a rising tide lifts all boats, and so they will share everything. They have litigation packets that they share with each other. They'll send each other all of their briefs. They'll send each other depositions of company witnesses and experts. They're always doing that. And the defense side, and I'm telling you, this has gone on my whole career, has always been reluctant to do that, and I've never understood it.
Well, one of the things that we found out while we were doing this paper was that, nuclear verdicts are increasing, that both in the frequency and in the amount, at the same time as actual fatalities and highway injuries are coming down. They've seemed to have peaked back in 2016, 2017. What do you think that reason is, that they're bigger and more often these verdicts are happening while the actual wrecks are coming down?
Well, I think it's 2 reasons. The first one is that money just doesn't mean like what it used to. I mean, I'm seriously, when I was a young lawyer, and that was a long time ago, when I started, if you heard $1 million, you fainted.
Right.
That's nothing anymore.
It's like the $3 million McDonald's verdict with the hot coffee. That was massive.
Yeah, it was. Although I have different opinions on that.
But maybe we can get into that.
Yeah, that's not as egregious. I mean, everyone talks about that, and it really was
it's like the original, right?
Yeah, it was sort of the genesis of all this tort reform that started in the country. It really was. That started an entire revolution in limiting plaintiffs' recoveries and so forth. But the second thing, I think, is social media. Everyone talks. Everyone describes things. They see lifestyles of the rich and famous, and money just doesn't mean like what it used to. And the other thing, I guess I said 2, but I'm going to say 3, plaintiffs' lawyers have been teaching each other not to be afraid to ask for a lot of money. It's called anchoring.
Anchoring, right.
Yes, and they figure that if you ask for a huge amount of money, and the jury gives you some awards some percentage of that they're actually doing the defense a favor.
Right.
And that needs to be covered in every trial, not to tell the jurors not to fall for that.
Yeah, it seems like they'll ask for $500,000 or they'll ask for $500 million, and if they think that they're not quite as egregious as $500 million, they'll give them $400 million and feel good about it.
Right, and it's up to the defense to point that out in the closing argument, to say you're not doing any favors. This case has not that kind of value. Don't fall for that. And I've actually mentioned the term anchoring to juries.
So that's one strategy that the plaintiff used. Another one, the most famous one, obviously, is the reptile theory. This has kind of become common knowledge between people, but you've done a lot of studying on it and written about it. You want to jump in and tell me what is the reptile theory and how they use it?
Sure. Yeah, it was sort of a revolutionary theory. There was a book in written in 2009 by a very famous plaintiff's lawyer and a jury consultant, and it's called Reptile. and then they developed an entire industry surrounding it. But the idea of the reptile is to get the jurors scared, worried, terrified, so that the sort of prehistoric part of our brains down in the basal cortex and the amygdala, those are all it really does have a basis in neuroscience.
Yeah.
And so when we were not evolved as a species, yeah, thank you. We had a fight or flight mentality, our ancestors, and that is what the reptile tries to tap into. They tell the jury that the community is in danger, the jurors are in danger, the families of the jurors are in danger. They can't actually say, what would you do if this was your son or wife or daughter or something, but they can say, this community has been put in needless danger by this trucking company, and the only way to prevent that in the future is with your verdict. So they tie the verdict not to the injuries, but they tie the verdict to improving and making society safer, and societal and safety rules need to be followed. And if they're not, the jury has to take care of that.
And you mentioned they call it the golden rule. Is that correct? That you can't say, what if this was your son or daughter? Is that in law, or is that just kind of like practicing between lawyers?
Yeah, that's pretty much it's the law of virtually every state, and of course federal courts use state law. There's no federal common law. So what that means is that almost every state says to the plaintiff, you can't say to the juror, what would you do if this was your family member, or your husband, daughter, wife, whatever, because that's just too inflammatory. So what they try to do with this reptile is go in the back door and do indirectly what they could not do directly by using the buzzwords of community, needless danger, danger to the motoring public, and there are safety rules put in place to protect the community, and they were violated here, and you have to take care of it. And they empower the jurors. The whole thing is about giving the jury power to make things better.
And what's your punchback against that? How do you stop that?
The way to punch back against that, and it can be effective, is to tell the jury exactly what's going on here, that they're being sold, they're being talked down to and sold a bill of goods, that they think that you will decide this case not on the law of the case that the judge gives you and the facts and the evidence that you hear, which is every court will tell the jury, you are to decide this case on the law that I give you and the facts that you heard. And what the anti-reptile is to say, don't fall for this. We're here to decide this case in a civil manner. It's a civil case. That's what they call it, not criminal, civil. And we're supposed to reason with each other. We've evolved from what they're trying to do to you. And I actually mention the reptile, and many other lawyers do. We're not afraid of it anymore, and it can be very effective. They say they've collected like over $7 billion, but we're not afraid of it anymore. We know we have ways of countering it by appealing to the jurors' better nature, to their evolved brains. I call it the primate brain, not the reptile brain.
Right.
Yeah.
So what other ways? So that's how you punch back in court. What would you tell to your carrier clients that are trying to avoid these in the future? What are ways that they can shore up their liability and make sure that they don't get hit with one of these verdicts?
Well, the first way is to pay attention to those 5 things. There's actually more, but to pay attention to those 5 things.
Right.
Make sure the hours of service are right. Make sure the maintenance is good. Make sure that the drivers are properly trained. Make sure that they're not on their phones or distracted. And of course, that goes without saying that they can't be on alcohol or drugs. So everything's a lawsuit starts before it ever happens, and by that I mean that the way trucking companies are run, and you start with the FMCSRs. Everyone has the Green Book. If you comply with those, you're miles ahead. And then the second thing is that once an accident happens, to be proactive, what we were talking about before, that rapid response, so that facts can be gathered, the good and the bad, we know about it. And then the third thing is that both the driver, everyone forgets about the drivers, but the drivers have to be totally prepared before they're put under oath in what's called a deposition. That's in the pretrial phase of a case. And of course, any of the company witnesses that are put up as representatives of the company have to be fully prepared, and I mean multiple preparation sessions, so that they know exactly what to expect and it can be uncomfortable. I, as a lawyer, my team, everyone who does this, trucking lawyers have to actually cross-examine these people and really lay on them, hammer them, because that's what they're going to get when the plaintiff's lawyer gets a hold of them.
Right.
And there can be witness training by psychologists in certain cases. They call it witness preparation. I call it witness training. If you have a very difficult driver, a very difficult company witness, but it has to be done multiple times, and the proper amount of money has to be spent on preparation before deposition, because that's under oath. So once a deposition occurs, you can't unring that bell. It's over. That testimony is on the record, and you can't go back from it. So that's why it has to be prepared for.
Well, cool. Let's shift gears a little bit to how brokers prepare. How can we've talking about some major brokers that have had seemingly a lot of issues over the years, that seemingly the same issues. What are the major causes for liability for brokers? We've talked about two, I think, and it's something like control and proper vetting. But you want to touch on those?
Yeah, I'll start with the second one you mentioned first. The first line of attack of a broker is that they didn't properly choose the trucking company that they brokered the load to or assigned the load to, and that's really it's really a bogus argument. I mean, if a motor carrier has a satisfactory or a rating, of course, many of the trucking companies they're unrated now because of the backlog, or there's not enough data or something like that. But if they are a DOT authorized motor carrier, and you go to like Carrier 411 or something, one of those services, and they're authorized to operate and so forth. Well, okay, the broker shouldn't be sued just because the trucking company makes a mistake and has an accident. And in fact, the law is getting much better for the brokers on that. It's called federal preemption. I won't bore you with it. The second one is if a broker, and this is really what they have to avoid, if they start controlling that motor carrier, they basically stand in the shoes of the trucking company, and they get into controlling the routes, the time, means, manner, kind of like what we talked about before.
Exactly.
They have to stay out of that. Even if a trucking company has a brokerage, those have to be separate. You cannot have a broker sticking their nose in and either controlling the driver, compensating the driver, disciplining the driver, telling the driver what routes to take, where, when. That's why it's so important for the broker-carrier agreement to have a ability of the motor carrier to turn down loads. You have to avoid issues of control if you're a broker.
Well, let's touch a bit on that industry, on the proper vetting again, because there's no industry standard for this, is there?
No, and that kind of just jumped up out of nowhere. There is a concept in the law called negligent entrustment. That's just fancy words for saying giving a vehicle to the wrong person.
Sure.
And so that has sort of morphed into that the broker has to get involved in really sticking their nose in, looking into the details of the trucking company. Do they keep their driver qualification files? Do they keep all the federally required records? I think that's a mistake. I don't think brokers should be doing that, because what you're doing is going down that path that the plaintiff's lawyers want. They want you to start doing that, and then they say, oh, well, you didn't do it well enough. So if you don't have a duty to do something, and there's nothing that says a broker does, broker liability cases have not blown up the way we thought they would way back when there was a case called Schramm versus a broker. I won't mention them, big broker. And we said, okay, well, that's the new thing. They really aren't that prevalent. But when brokers start not controlling, but doing way too much vetting of trucking companies, then the plaintiff's lawyers argue you didn't go far enough. So there's a concept in the law that if they are a DOT authorized carrier, if they have a continue to operate authority, if they, you can check CSA scores, which, those are not real reliable, but you can look into them, the public parts, then you leave it at that. You don't start digging more and asking for all their documents and things like that. That's the negligent selection.
Well, so if you're, you may not know the answer to this, but if you're a broker and you don't want to get into a controlling position where you're dictating routes and you're dictating drop off and pickup times, how do you guarantee, adequate service to your shipper that you're brokering the load for. If you don't really know, if you don't have visibility into what's going on.
Well, I think that it's a buy play, and of course everyone wants to get business. And by the way, you got to watch what you say on your websites, because some of the brokers, the large brokers, say we choose only the safest carriers. We will do all of your vetting for you. I think it's a mistake, but I also understand there's a business aspect to that. Mm-hmm. Everybody is competitive and they want to get business. So I think you assure the shipper that this is a DOT authorized carrier. They have a continue to operate. Either they're not rated because the government hasn't gotten to them, or they have a satisfactory rating, but they are legal to operate. There's nothing egregious. We did some checking on 411 or whatever the carrier sites are that have data. We've done a PSP, or we've looked at the PSP on the drivers, and they have insurance. They have the right financial responsibility under Part 387, all of that, and then you don't assure anyone, but you tell the shipper this carrier is good to go. We certainly can't look into the depth of what it might take to. We can't become the motor carrier. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Okay. So I've kind of run out of questions here, but we can talk about. You got anything on your side you'd like to chat about?
Well, some of the things we're seeing now, in addition to the nuclear verdicts, are, and I really want to mention this just briefly, is that insurance companies sometimes send out people to look into the trucking company's operation, and some now insurance companies are starting to get sued, believe it or not, for sort of assuming the duty of the safety of the people they insure. So that's sort of a on the horizon type of issue. As far as other issues coming up, we still are interested in the reptile, continuing to combat that and sharing information about that. And, I do want to mention another thing about these nuclear verdicts.
Okay.
If you're at fault and you're wrong, if the trucking company is responsible for this accident and you're going to admit to the jury and to the family this is our fault, you have to go all in on that. You can't do it half-baked. I won't say the other word. You can't go halfway. If you're going to admit that you're at fault, then you do it, and you tell the jury, we own this, we're taking full responsibility for it. We haven't been able to agree on the compensation. You're going to have to decide that. But you can't say, well, yeah, we're at fault, but. That's really important. Jurors hate that. They also hate being talked down to by either the defendant or their lawyers. Folks, you're not going to understand this, but I'll try and explain it to you. They don't want to hear that. And they also don't want to be hearing things over and over again. They hate repetition. They hate being talked down to.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we spoke to lawyers on both sides when we were doing this paper, and we spoke to actually a colleague of yours or a friend of yours, Joe Freed, and we asked him what his reasons for why these nuclear verdicts were happening, why trucking companies were losing, and he mentioned that exactly was gamesmanship. It was that idea of not accepting full responsibility, or trying to deflect, saying that the other person could have done something else better or different, and trying to kind of push off liability.
Yeah, I agree. And Joe Freed is one of the classiest. He makes a lot of money and he hits trucking companies, but he's a superb lawyer, and I'm not surprised he said that. It's just so self-evident. If you're the jurors, all they want is honesty. I've learned that over the years of 40 years of trying cases nearly, and the way they want people to be straight with them. They want honesty. They don't want people fudging or gamesmanship.
Yeah, I think it may have been you that we spoke a bit about that talking down portion, that collectively the 12 jurors are so much more intelligent than the individual parts. There's some kind of there's an intelligence there, and they don't want to be spoken down to. But one of the things that I do want to touch on before we get out of here is it's something that Bobby Shannon actually mentioned to me about insurance towers and some of the reasons why. I asked him in that case, the case in Columbus, why that eventually went to trial. I asked him why didn't he settle, and he said, I tried to settle. I would have settled that case, but he didn't really have the liberty to settle that case. So, talk a little bit about why you don't have the liberty to settle some cases and you're forced into trial.
Yeah, in the final analysis, if there's insurance or the client, if it's a trucking company, it's their decision. The lawyer can give their best advice. But the problem with these towers is there's layers of insurance there's up to 1 million, then there's 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, and then they can go as high as, I don't know what, 200, $300 million. And there's all of these excess carriers and what they call reinsurers in the mix. And somebody makes a final decision. Whoever's got the control at that point, you may have never met them. They're not your client. They're 10 layers above the insurance company that hired you or your client. And someone makes a decision, and maybe they don't know anything about law. The problem is that accountants and bean counters have sort of taken over the claims business in many ways, and they think it's crazy what you're talking about, and so they let the case go to trial, and then bad things can happen. But I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong in that big case. Things happen. I've lost and I've won. And any lawyer who tells you that they've tried cases and they've never lost is a liar, because that means they haven't tried cases. But but the point is that the corporate aspect of insurance and claims handling is it's just not the way it was when I started.
So you let's give the people some more info about you. You're based in Cleveland, correct?
Yes, I'm a partner with the firm of Gallagher Sharp in Cleveland. Also Toledo, Detroit, and Columbus, and we have sort of a national trucking practice. Like I said, I'm just almost all trucking now, and I can't drive a stick shift, but I know everything there is to know about trucking. That's what I tell people.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Joe. I'll let you get out of here. I'll move on, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, man.
And how do people reach out to you if they want to learn more about you or try to get your services?
Yeah, well, I'm on Facebook, of course. The firm is to Gallagher Sharp. Is the firm Joe Pappalardo. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and then you can always get in touch with me through the firm Gallagher Sharp, or my email, which is impossible, but it's jpappalardo@GallagherSharp.
You know what? I'll put some info in the article that we write.
Thanks.
Some contact info.
Well, I sure appreciate that opportunity. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to me.
Okay,
All right.
you. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So we got a call with Ryan Schreiber here in a couple minutes from CarrierDirect. Let me go ahead and give a shout out to CarrierDirect and thank them for all of the lovely content that they provide to us on a weekly basis, as they did this week again. Diane CO, thank you so much. So I'll jump into the DHL supply chain, the pricing power index for this week. We actually jumped 5 points. We're seeing intermodal volumes down, double digits year over year. We're seeing customs data come in that's not too pretty. Bye, Joe.
Thank you.
All right, safe travels.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, we're seeing custom data, especially that from China, which makes up 22% of our imports. It's down 30% from its normal Chinese New Year lows. So when is it going to stop? Are we going to see an increase in volumes? I think so. I think it'll come in, the end of March, early April. We're still seeing a lot of blank sailings happening through the end of April. We're having canceled sailings, and we're having ships come, either smaller ships or ships that are completely empty, coming from China. But we are getting a lot of data, and we're getting a lot of sentiment from the maritime operators, the big shipping companies that are moving things from China to the U.S., that they're seeing port activity. They're seeing almost normalcy in a lot of the ports, the major ports in China, and a lot of that's because of the restrictions that were dropped on February 28th. The factories themselves were open almost 3 weeks ago now, but they didn't have a lot of the drayage capacity. They had nobody to move the goods from the factory to the port, because a lot of the drayage drivers are migrant workers, as much of the factory workers in China are. They live on other sides of the country. They were still under travel restriction. They weren't able to get in and move those goods. So we've got some data from Worldwide Logistics that Lorianne LaRocco wrote about this weekend that says if you look at this drayage capacity there, the 28th and 29th, or not the, yeah, actually we did have a 29th, leap year, 28th and 29th of February, you saw this drayage capacity just come flying back onto online, and you're seeing a lot of these goods finally get to the port and eventually will hit the shores of the U.S. All that is to say that is all happening, that you're going to have shippers trying to, there's two things that shippers need to do now when all of this, when you have this increase of demand, increase of volume from the ports, and also an increase of demand in certain goods because of the coronavirus. You got to do two things. You've got to meet that demand spike, which you have to do on an inventory side on yourself, and another procurement side from wherever you're getting it from, typically China. And then two, you've got to be able to meet the logistical needs. You've got to secure capacity for all of those goods. And we spoke to an international retailer just this week that said they're expecting an increased need of trucking capacity up upwards of 30 and 35% by the end of March. So you're going to have a lot of shippers looking for capacity. And this is all happening at the same time that our outbound tender volume index, our measure of volumes in the U.S., is up more than double digits year over year. It's up 13%. Volumes are looking really strong in the U.S. domestically, even though we're having schools shut down, we're having things happen. We haven't seen all of the impact of the coronavirus really seep into our data yet. We certainly will see it. But for that reason, we see volumes up 12% year over year. We actually saw outbound tender rejection index kind of float upwards above 7% now. So for these reasons, we have moved the DHL supply chain pricing power index up 5 points to the carriers. I wouldn't be surprised if we had 5 more points to the carriers this week. We have OTVI continue to go up, OTRI continue to going up, and I'll be watching that new truck stop data pretty closely when we are doing our paper this week. We've got that new data from truckstop.com, which means we've got 100 different lanes of spot data. I think they're the 100 biggest lanes of spot data, and we've got an all-in rate there. And I'm able to do a little math, a very simple mile calculation, and get us a per mile rate on that. So we will use that to see how this dynamic is changing between volumes and capacity, and whether there's any impact to spot rates. So we'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and give Ryan Schreiber a call. I'm sure Kevin will be joining us here soon. But actually, I think Kevin is going to be out for today. So it's just me. And let me call Ryan. Pardon me for the wait, guys. I usually would have a filler here, Mr. Kevin Hill, talking with me, but he's in another webinar.
This is Ryan.
Hey, Ryan Schreiber. This is Andrew Cox, man. How you doing?
Hey, Andrew. I'm good, buddy. How are you?
I am lovely. I got some terrible news. Kevin is not going to be joining us today, so it's just you and me.
Oh, no. Well, that's okay.
Yeah,
Happy to be with you.
Yeah, I think we can make it work.
Yeah, we should be able to. If not, we got bigger problems, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. What are you doing these days? Where are you headed? You're always on the road.
I am. I'm actually literally on the road right now. I'm heading from Chicago toward the Milwaukee area for a meeting this afternoon.
Well, that sounds good, man. Let's jump right into some of this data. It's been a crazy couple of weeks with the coronavirus. I don't know if anybody at CarrierDirect is taking any precautions. It kind of helps you to be traveling a little bit, be out of the office. But let's jump into some of the data. We've seen imports, customs data, especially on the West Coast, down, double digits, down massively. Over the past couple of months, we've seen intermodal volumes down, but somehow our outbound tender volume index is up 12%. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly, we think that we work primarily domestically, right? So the information that we get is typically from our trucking clients and our intermediary clients. Last week, I was at the TCA conference, and there was definitely some concern. People were definitely saying, "Hey, we are feeling the pinch a little bit from the virus," which is different than what we were hearing a couple weeks earlier at the Stifel conference and VGSA conferences. That seems to have changed a little bit over the course of the last week or so. Consumers are spending a lot of money. They're going to stores. They're buying soap. They're buying some of these supplies in case they have to, hole up at home. So certainly that seems to be some of it. And there is a little bit of hope, as you were just talking about before you called me, around some of these sailings increasing, and that in the next few weeks things will normalize a little bit as compared to sort of what they're supposed to be this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I do think there's definitely a pull forward. I think that's affecting these freight markets. We're seeing people just go crazy for toilet paper for some reason. I see a lot of people loading up on that, they're going to need that extremely. But what do you think this leaves us for the second half recovery that everybody's kind of expecting for and been waiting for?
Well, there could be a little bit of a dam effect, right? I mean, there's been plenty of talk around whether or not some of these goods will ever eventually ship, right? Particularly with retail, in season, out of season type things. But regardless, there'll be some pressure that kind of builds up behind this dam to get goods into the U.S. and then ship them. So there's an interesting mix there, right? You don't want the dam to burst. You certainly want there to be a free flow of goods. And so this could actually be a good thing going forward into the second half of the year if there's enough pressure to sort of buoy rates going into the second half. Open question around how oil prices are dropping, right? So, like, typically there's some sort of correlation there between oil prices and capacity. Oil prices going down typically means capacity is going to be looser. So that'll be an interesting interplay to watch.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up oil markets. This is just one of the craziest weekends ever. The way that Saudis slashed the oil price and are going to increase production, trying to kind of pigeonhole the Russians into cutting production. But they seemingly are going to be able to ride this out. They said they can go months with a $25 barrel of oil. What do you think?
That's something that I'm not smart enough to talk on, to be totally transparent about it. There's things I know a lot about and things I don't. I sort of watch what happens on the other side. If they say they can ride it out, I suppose that I'm willing to take them at face value and say that they can. Whether they will or not is another question.
So let's talk a little bit about the I guess it is a big question mark with the impact that really cheap oil will have on trucking companies. But what do you think? At least in the very near term, is it going to? You think it's going to loosen up some capacity around the country having such cheap gas?
But potentially, there's so many interesting interplays here, right? I mean, trucking companies going out of business doesn't necessarily really remove capacity from the market. Maybe it moves capacity around the market.
Right, because drivers just go and move to another company?
Yeah, the driver just doesn't suddenly most of the drivers don't just suddenly hang up the spurs, if you will, and go do something else. So that'll definitely be interesting. I don't think that there's a lot of pressure toward the market, although you may see it's not so much that the oil price might bring additional capacity into the market, but domestic production is going to change. Domestic production might slow down. You'll see these sand haulers and the oil field haulers maybe move into dry van or reefer capacity. That's certainly a potential impact, something to definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that's an impact as well. I think a lot of those drivers that were working in the oil fields are going to be moving over. There's not going to be any drilling, at least for the near term. There's not going to be any new open wells being having. So there's a lot of drivers there, in Texas, Oklahoma area that are going to be getting back on the over the road.
Yeah, the drivers are talking about that on social media a ton. That's been the kind of the chatter on some of these social media boards that I follow the last few days. That they certainly expect that to come from the oil prices, particularly.
Well, cool. Ryan, you want to do the long short segment with me since Kevin's not here?
Yeah, I love long short.
Okay, cool. We'll do it. So, have you? I guess I got to ask you if you've heard of it. Have you heard of Quibi? It's the new kind of streaming platform coming out next month.
Okay, no. Say more about this.
Yeah. I'll give you more about it. So it is. It's a mobile native streaming platform. It's going to be dropping April 6th. They've got, almost $1.5 billion in funding. Ridiculously well funded. They've got some monster names like Jeffrey Katzenberg. He's the ex-chair of Disney, and Meg Whitman, the honestly gangster ex-CEO of HP. So they've got big names on the administrative side, and they've also got big names on the talent side. They're going to drop 50 new shows when they launch on April 6th. We've got shows from LeBron and Christoph Waltz and Chrissy Teigen. The list goes on and on. But the really special thing about the streaming platform is its ability to flip both ways. So everything's filmed with two cameras. It's filmed with a vertical camera and a horizontal camera. So it's kind of like almost interactive content where it will ask you to flip your camera for action scenes or something else. It's basically just kind of focusing on us migrating away from everything in the rest of the world and just focusing on our phone screen. That seems to be the only movement here. Are you long or short the idea of a digitally native? Of a mobile native streaming platform really upending the way that we consume content?
Is it free or paid?
They're giving 90 days away for free, and then I think it's like $6 a month.
I'm going to be short on it. I have a good friend who is an entertainment attorney, and a couple months ago I was with him out in the West Coast. And my question was hey, what's the long-term plan for any of these streaming services? Because it's getting expensive between Disney Plus and and CBS, you have to pay to stream.
Right.
So, if it was free for a while, it could give consumers a chance to get comfortable with it and change their behavior or change their expectations. But people are already paying for a lot of streaming services, so I got to be short on it for that reason.
Okay, well, I'm glad you went short because I'll go long on this. I think not only the names that they have behind them with Meg Whitman and the ex-chair from Disney, but they've got this ridiculous cast of people that are going to be making shows. Not always actors or even personalities of that type. They've got a kind of a wide range of things going on with some really clever ideas for shows. They're going to be kind of smaller, more digestible, the 5 to 20 minute range. So yeah, I'm long. I think they can. I think our attention span is only going to get shorter and shorter and shorter, and this is one big step to to losing the 1 hour streaming platform.
It's an interesting idea. It's a cool idea, and I'm excited to hear what happens with it.
Yeah, I am too. I'm excited for the free 90 days. I just actually found that out today, so I'm definitely going to be signing up and testing out some of the new stuff.
All right, I'll have to get your login.
Yeah, all right. Sounds good. And our last long short, this is a really sad one for me. I hope I'm going to be short. I hope you're short. I hope the committee that decides this is short. It's about March Madness. Do you think it's going to happen, and will it happen with fans in the stands?
Is short meaning that it's
short meaning that it will happen, hopefully.
Oh yeah, I think it'll happen. There's too much money at stake. There's too much fandom is just so emotionally attached to this. I think there's no way that it doesn't happen. And as a Michigan State Spartan, I certainly hope that I'm also hoping that they go pretty far. So whether that's long or short, I'm hopeful. I'm long on their hopefulness.
Okay, yeah, I'm short as well. I didn't know you were a Spartan. How are the Spartans doing these days? I mean, my team is Vanderbilt, and we've been absolute garbage this year, so I haven't really paid attention much.
Up and down. Like let's say that they have some talent. They're a little bit short on their bench, but some of their role players are really stepping up. So we'll see. I mean, this is Tom Izzo time.
Yep.
So they're getting hot at the right time as they usually do.
Yeah, he's a master of March, isn't he?
He sure is. That's why they call it. That's why they renamed it in Michigan from March to Izzo.
All right, Ryan. That is all I've got today. Thank you. Thanks for calling in, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Talk to you soon again.
All right, man.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 19 of Great Quarter. Guys, we'll be back next week. We got a 6 days, 23-hour break. We'll be back next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Talk to you then.